Vincent had always been a ghost in the night, cold, calculating, untouchable. His reputation preceded him, a master of deception and crime who had never been caught. But this job would be different. It would be his last, the one that would set him free from a life of running, of looking over his shoulder. He had planned every second of the heist, every possible complication. There was no room for error. Dressed in black, he walked into the bank with the confidence of a man who had done this 100 times before. The mask concealed his face, but his voice, steady and commanding, filled the room. "Nobody moves and no one gets hurt." The terrified employees complied, their hands trembling as they emptied the registers and opened the vault. The hostages cowered, the air thick with fear. He felt nothing, no hesitation, no remorse. This was business. Everything was going according to plan. The bags were filled, the security systems were disabled, and in just a few more minutes he would be out of there. But then something went wrong, not with the heist, but with him. A sharp pain shot through his chest, searing, relentless. His vision blurred, his breath caught in his throat. His body betrayed him, his knees buckled, and before he could even process what was happening, he collapsed. The world around him spiraled into chaos. The sound of sirens grew louder. Police stormed in, weapons raised. Shouts filled the space, but Vincent couldn't respond. His body lay motionless on the cold marble floor as paramedics rushed in. Hands pressed against his chest, desperate voices calling his name. But Vincent was slipping away, beyond their reach. Vincent expected death to be nothingness, an abrupt end, a blackout with no return. But as his body lay lifeless on the bank floor, his mind remained awake, aware. He felt light, weightless, as if unshackled from the body. That had failed him. Then he realized something strange. He was no longer inside himself. Hovering above the chaos, he saw everything as if watching a scene from a movie. The paramedics were frantically working to restart his heart. Electrodes pressed against his skin, defibrillator paddles charged, voices sharp and urgent. He could see the sweat beading on the forehead of one of the medics, the nervous shake of a police officer gripping his gun, the quiet sobs of a woman who had been caught in the robbery. He shouldn't be able to notice these things, yet every detail was vivid, clearer than he had ever experienced in life. He could also hear. The officers talked about him, recognizing his name. "Vincent Cade. We've been after this guy for years." The paramedics muttered updates to each other, the beeping of the machines filling the tense silence between their words. The sounds wrapped around him, yet he had no body, only awareness. Then the shift happened. A force, unseen but undeniable, pulled him away from the scene. The lights, the sounds, the world as he knew it faded into a suffocating darkness. A tunnel stretched before him, deep, endless. Panic surged through him. He tried to move, to resist, but there was nothing to grab onto, no ground beneath him. The pull intensified. He was no longer a man. He was something smaller, powerless, being drawn toward a destination he could not yet see, and deep within him he knew this was not a dream. This was real, and wherever he was going, it was far beyond the world he had once controlled. The pull was relentless. Vincent felt as if he were being dragged through a vast, endless void, the tunnel stretching infinitely before him. Fear clamped around his mind like a vice. He had faced death before, gunfights, close calls, the ever-present risk of his criminal life, but nothing had ever terrified him. Like this, he had no control, no weapon, no escape. Then, a sudden shift. The darkness around him shattered, replaced by an overwhelming radiance. A light unlike anything he had ever seen, not blinding, but consuming, penetrating every inch of his existence. He found himself standing, not with his body, but as something deeper, something more real than flesh. His feet felt no ground, yet he was upright, suspended in an endless expanse of brilliance. And then he saw it. Before him stood a presence. Not a man, not a being of flesh, but something beyond comprehension. It radiated authority, power, and an unshakable certainty. It was neither cruel nor kind. It simply was. Vincent wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Every part of him was exposed before this presence, as though every secret, every hidden crime, every unspoken thought had been laid bare. Then it began. His life unraveled before him, not in fragments, but in a seamless, living memory. He was not just watching it, he was reliving it. Every moment from his earliest childhood to his final breath in that bank played out before him, and he experienced it all again, as if he were trapped in time. He saw his first theft. A wallet slipped from an old man's coat pocket when he was just a boy. The rush of excitement, the thrill of getting away with it. Then, his first robbery, an armed convenience store hit with his crew. The store clerk trembling, begging for his life. Vincent had laughed then, laughed, and now here he felt everything that man had felt. The terror, the helplessness, the gut-wrenching panic, memory after memory, crime after crime. He wasn't just watching himself, he was forced to endure the suffering he had inflicted. The women he had threatened, the men he had beaten, the lives he had destroyed without a second thought. He could feel it. The weight of it pressed on him like an iron cage, suffocating, crushing. Then came the worst part. He saw his mother, the woman who had raised him alone, who had prayed for him, wept for him, begged him to turn away from the life he had chosen. He had ignored her, cursed her name, left her behind. He saw the nights she spent awake, worrying, clutching the phone, waiting for news that her son was dead or in prison. He had always told himself that he didn't care, that she was weak, foolish, but now he felt her pain. Every tear, every sleepless night, every prayer she had whispered for him, it all crashed into him like a tidal wave of sorrow. He collapsed to his knees. He wanted to scream, to shut it out, to escape this relentless flood of truth. But there was no escape, there was only judgment, and then the presence spoke. Forgiveness exists, but every action has consequences. The voice was neither angry nor merciful. It simply was. Absolute. Final. Vincent looked up, trembling. For the first time in his life, he felt truly small. He had always thought himself above the law, above consequences. But here in this place, there was no bribing, no running, no fighting his way out. He was not beyond redemption, but he was not beyond justice either. Then the presence spoke again, and its words would change him forever. You will return, but you will not escape what is owed. You must face what you have done. And in that moment, Vincent understood. He had a second chance, but not a way out. He had to pay the price for the life he had lived. But for the first time in his existence, he was ready to do so. Then, just as suddenly as he had arrived, the light vanished, and Vincent was falling, back toward the darkness, back toward his body, back toward the life he had left behind. Vincent plummeted. The radiant presence and the unbearable weight of judgment faded, replaced by something far worse, absence. The light was gone, and in its place a suffocating darkness swallowed him whole. At first, he thought he was simply falling back into his body, back into life. But then he saw it. A chasm stretched below him, vast and endless, its depths pulsing with something unnatural. The air grew thick with a stench of decay and burning, a suffocating mixture that made him want to retch, except he had no body, no lungs to choke, no mouth to scream. And then the whispers began. At first they were distant, scattered, barely more than a murmur in the void. But as he fell, they grew louder. Moans of suffering, cries of despair, shrieks that echoed through the darkness. Vincent had heard many sounds in his lifetime: gunfire, sirens, the final breaths of men who had crossed him, but nothing like this. This was different. This was agony without end. Then the shapes emerged. He couldn't make out their faces, only twisted, shifting forms, moving in the shadows. They weren't like anything he had ever seen. No flesh, no solid form, just torment. They writhed, reaching out with elongated fingers that never quite touched him, but left behind an unbearable chill in the air. Their moans weren't just sounds. They carried emotions, raw and unbearable: regret, terror, hopelessness. Vincent tried to pull away, but he had no control. The pull toward the abyss was stronger now, a force dragging him. down, as if gravity itself had decided he belonged there. No, he thought, no, this isn't for me. I'm not supposed to be here. But even as he thought it, he knew it was a lie. He had earned this place. Every life he had destroyed, every moment of pain he had inflicted, every selfish act, it all led here. There was no escaping it. And then a voice, not like the others, not full of suffering or hatred. This voice was different, powerful, unyielding. You see now what awaits those who choose to live without light. The abyss trembled. The wailing of the damned grew more frantic, as if they too could hear it. Hell is not merely fire and torment. It is separation. It is the loss of everything good, everything real. It is the weight of every sin carried alone, without mercy, without hope. Vincent shook. If a soul could tremble, his did. The finality of it hit him like a hammer. This was more than just a place. It was forever, the voice continued. But you have been given a chance. The force pulling him downward suddenly weakened. The hands of the lost souls stretched toward him, but could no longer reach. The darkness pulsed, as if rejecting him. There is a way back, but it is not easy. You will suffer. You will pay for your past, and you will face judgment, not from us, but from the world you left behind. And then he was pulled upward. The screams below him grew fainter. The shadows receded. The abyss shrank beneath him. He was rising, not into the brilliance he had first encountered, but back toward something else. Back toward life. Back toward consequences. Then, with a gasp, Vincent Cade opened his eyes. Vincent Cade's first breath back in the land of the living came like a violent surge, as if his very soul had been shoved back into his body. His eyes flew open, wide and glassy, his lungs convulsing as if desperate to confirm that air still existed. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital room burned into his vision, and the first thing he heard was the panicked voice of a nurse. "He's awake! My God, he's awake!" The words barely registered. His mind was still tangled in the echoes of what he had seen. The light, the judgment, the abyss. His body felt like it didn't belong to him, like it was something foreign, something borrowed. The weight of existence pressed down on him again. But it wasn't the same. He wasn't the same. Blurred figures moved around him, doctors, nurses, police officers standing guard at the door. He could hear their frantic voices, the rustling of medical equipment, the hurried clatter of a clipboard being grabbed. Someone shone a small flashlight into his pupils, checking his responsiveness. But Vincent wasn't really there, not yet. He was still falling through the echoes of where he had been. "Impossible," one of the doctors muttered under his breath, shaking his head. His heart stopped for over 7 minutes. "There's no way he should be conscious, let alone moving." "Well, he is," another responded, equally baffled. "Check his vitals again." The room felt unreal, like a stage where actors played their roles in a script he no longer belonged to. But then, suddenly, the reality of his situation sank in. He tried to move, and a sharp pain seared through his chest, like fire licking at his ribs. His entire body felt weak, as if it had been drained of all strength. He winced, groaning, and the sound finally broke the moment of disbelief. "Vincent Cade," a new voice spoke, deeper, authoritative. He forced his eyes to focus and saw a police officer standing at the foot of his hospital bed, badge gleaming under the overhead light. His expression was unreadable, but his posture made one thing clear. He wasn't here out of concern. He was here to make sure Vincent didn't go anywhere. "You're under arrest." The words should have filled Vincent with dread. Before they would have. The thought of losing his freedom, of spending the rest of his life behind bars, would have made him fight, made him plan his next escape. But now, he felt something different. Acceptance. The officer continued speaking, listing his crimes, his rights, but Vincent barely heard them. His mind was still caught in the chasm between life and death. He had been given a chance, not to escape justice, but to face it, to pay for what he had done, to change, and for the first time in his entire life, he wasn't running anymore. The doctors insisted he needed time to recover before they could move him to a prison hospital. His body was weak, but his mind was sharp, and the memories of what he had seen, what he had felt, would not leave him. He spent days in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the visions over and over, the weight of his past crimes, the horror of what could have been his eternal fate, the voice that had told him there was a way back. It all pulsed through his mind like a fever he couldn't shake. Visitors came, some expected, some not. A lawyer assigned to his case spoke in a low, hurried tone about trials and sentencing, about legal defenses and plea bargains. Vincent barely responded. None of that mattered to him now. A priest came, a quiet man with kind eyes who spoke of redemption and God's mercy. Vincent listened, not because he was looking for a way out of punishment. He knew he deserved whatever was coming, but because, for the first time in his life, he actually wanted to understand. And then there was the visit he never expected, his mother. When she walked in, he almost didn't recognize her. The years had changed her, added wrinkles to her face, streaks of gray to her hair. But the pain in her eyes was the same, the pain he had put there. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, looking at him, as if trying to decide whether he was real. Then finally, she whispered, "They said you died." He swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he forced himself to speak. "I did." Silence stretched between them. And then, to his shock, she stepped forward and placed a trembling hand on his arm. "But you came back." A lump formed in his throat. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess, to beg for forgiveness, to make up for every tear she had shed because of him. But what words could possibly undo years of pain? So instead, he said the only thing he could, "I'm sorry." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a long time she just looked at him. Then softly, she nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. And for Vincent, that was enough. The days in the hospital passed like slow-moving shadows. Vincent's body healed, but his mind remained restless. His encounter with death, the judgment he faced, the abyss that had nearly claimed him, it all replayed in his thoughts like a relentless film reel. He could still feel the weight of the suffering he had caused, the voices of those he had wronged echoing in his conscience. And then came the inevitable, his transfer to prison. The moment he was well enough to be moved, officers escorted him out of the hospital, his wrists shackled, the weight of the chains feeling lighter than the burden in his soul. The ride to the penitentiary was silent. The officers spoke little, and Vincent didn't feel the need to fill the void. He wasn't the same man who had entered that bank, full of greed and arrogance. That man had died on the cold marble floor. The prison gates loomed ahead, massive, foreboding, a fortress of consequence. The sound of iron doors clanking shut behind him felt final, yet oddly fitting. This was where he was supposed to be, no longer as a criminal running from justice, but as a man facing it head-on. His reputation preceded him. The other inmates recognized him. Some respected him for his past, others saw him as just another convict. Whispers filled the yard as he walked through for the first time. Cade? No way. Thought he'd never get caught. Heard he died and came back. Some crazy miracle or something. Ain't no miracle in here, man. Just time and regret. But Vincent wasn't concerned with the rumors. He had a mission now. He sought out the prison chaplain, an older man with a quiet presence and watchful eyes. Vincent wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he knew he needed guidance. "I don't know why I was given a second chance," Vincent admitted one evening, sitting in the dimly lit chapel, the sound of distant shouts from the yard echoing through the thick walls. "But I know I can't waste it." The chaplain nodded, folding his hands together. "Redemption isn't about erasing the past, Vincent. It's about what you do with the time you have left." Those words stuck with him, and so his real sentence began. Not just his years behind bars, but the internal battle of transformation. Some days were harder than others. The prison environment was brutal. Fights broke out. Men plotted against each other, and survival instincts ruled over morality. It would have been easy to slip back into old ways, to let the hardened criminal within him take control. But every time temptation whispered, he remembered the abyss. He remembered the nothingness that had almost consumed him, and he refused to go back. Instead, he focused on something else, helping others. He started with small things, talking to younger inmates who were just beginning their descent into a life of crime, warning them of where it would lead. Some ignored him, laughing at his change of heart, but others listened. One night, a young man, barely 20, approached him. "You really saw it?" the kid asked hesitantly. "The place after death?" Vincent studied him, recognizing the same recklessness in his eyes that he once had. "I did," he answered simply, "and you don't want to end up there." The young man swallowed hard, his bravado cracking just slightly. That was enough for Vincent. A seed had been planted. As weeks turned into months, Vincent devoted himself to learning about faith, justice, and the meaning of true change. He read books he never would have touched before, studied scriptures with the chaplain, and even wrote letters to those he had wronged, seeking no response, only the chance to express what he should have said long ago. But redemption wasn't just about changing internally, it was about proving it. And proving it meant facing the hardest challenge yet. His victims. One by one, names and faces haunted his mind. The people he had robbed, threatened and hurt. He could never undo what he had done, but he could take responsibility. So he began the painful process of writing letters to them. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote in one. "I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I see the pain I caused and I regret it with everything in me." Some letters were returned, unopened. Others went unanswered. But one day, he received a single response. It was from a woman he had held at gunpoint during a robbery years ago. "I have spent years hating you," her letter read. "I wanted you dead, but now, knowing that you're seeking redemption, I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but maybe one day I will." Vincent read that line over and over again, not because it erased his sins, but because it was proof that change was possible, that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't beyond hope. As time went on, his purpose became clear. He wasn't just here to serve his sentence, he was here to atone, and he would spend every remaining day of his life making sure he did. Years passed. The walls of the prison no longer felt like a cage to Vincent Cade. They were simply the place where he now existed. Once, he would have seen them as barriers, symbols of defeat. Now, they were his battleground, not for survival, but for redemption. He had done his time the right way, not just counting down the years, but changing, learning, paying back what he could in the only ways he knew how. The violent man who had once ruled his world with greed and ruthlessness had long since died. What remained was someone else, someone willing to face his past, no matter how painful. But he never expected to be released. When the warden called him into his office, Vincent had assumed it was just another routine update about his sentence. Another denial of parole, another confirmation that the rest of his days would be spent behind these walls. He had made peace with that long ago, but what he heard instead nearly took the breath from his lungs. "You're getting out." Vincent stared at him, certain he had misheard. "What?" The warden leaned back in his chair, studying him. "The parole board reviewed your case, your conduct over the years, the letters from victims you've helped, the chaplains, testimony, even some of the guards spoke on your behalf." He exhaled. "It doesn't erase what you've done, but the system believes you've changed, and now you have a chance to prove it on the outside." The words felt surreal. For a moment, Vincent wasn't sure how to react. He had prepared himself for a lifetime in this place. He had accepted that. He had even embraced it. Now, the door he thought would remain locked forever was suddenly opening. The warden's voice softened just slightly. "Don't waste it, Cade." The following weeks were a blur of preparation and bureaucracy, paperwork, meetings with his parole officer, arrangements for housing. When the day finally came and the gates of the prison opened before him, he stepped out into the sunlight for the first time in decades. It felt too bright, too open, too unreal. The world had changed, and so had he. A different kind of life. Freedom was strange. He no longer knew how to live as an ordinary man. He had spent his youth running from the law and his later years locked away. Now he had to figure out what it meant to simply exist in the world again. But one thing was clear: he would not waste this chance. He found work through a local outreach program, helping former convicts reintegrate into society. He saw men coming in with the same hardened expressions, the same cold detachment he had once carried. Some of them still had that criminal fire in their eyes, convinced the world owed them something. Others were lost, unsure of how to exist beyond the cages they had known for so long. Vincent understood them all, and so he did what he could. He told them his story, not just the part about prison, but the part about what came after, about what he saw when he crossed the line between life and death, about the judgment that awaited beyond the grave. At first, some laughed at him. They thought he was making it up, that it was just another convict's way of scaring them straight. But others listened. Some even asked questions, and slowly the whispers began. "You heard about Cade?" "Yeah," said he saw the other side. Said he felt everything he ever did, like he was on trial for his own soul. Some dismissed him, others feared him, but a few, just a few, started to wonder if he was telling the truth, and that was enough. Forgiveness and justice. One day, he received a letter. It was from the same woman he had robbed years ago, the one who had written to him in prison. "I used to think about you with nothing but hatred," it read. "I wanted to see you rot in that cell for the rest of your life, but now, I don't know. I've seen what you're doing. I've heard about the people you've helped, and I can't bring myself to hold on to that anger anymore. I don't know if I can fully forgive you yet, but maybe I don't have to. Maybe it's enough to know that you're not the same man anymore." Vincent held the letter in his hands for a long time, staring at the words. He never expected to be forgiven. He didn't think he deserved it, but knowing that at least one of his victims no longer carried hatred in her heart because of him, it was more than he had ever hoped for. Justice had been served. He had paid for what he had done. But justice and forgiveness were not the same. One was about consequences. The other was about grace, a message for those who still have time. Vincent Cade never forgot what he had seen in that place beyond death. He never forgot the abyss, the weight of judgment, the voices of the lost. He knew beyond any doubt that every action mattered, every choice had weight, and one day, everyone would face what he had faced. But he had been given something few were ever given, a second chance. And so, he spent the rest of his days using it, speaking, warning, helping others change before it was too late, because he knew the truth that so many refused to believe. Forgiveness exists, but so does justice. And no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how clever, escapes judgment in the end. If this story kept you hooked until now, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps bring more content like this. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. Share this video with your friends and family, because this message might impact more people than you think. And now, drop a comment below and let me know which country you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far this story has reached.